The mahogany-lined courtroom of Judge William Porter stood as a testament to old money and older power, its polished surfaces reflecting the morning light that streamed through tall windows. The air hung heavy with the weight of pending judgment, perfumed with lemon-scented polish and privilege. At the defendant's table, Marcus Thompson's basketball-calloused hands gripped the edge of his seat, his school tie knotted perfectly at his throat, a detail his mother had fussed over that morning, as if proper attire could somehow tip the scales of justice. Dr. Patricia Thompson sat ramrod straight in the gallery's first row, her white doctor's coat traded for a conservative Navy suit. Her fingers clutched a manila envelope containing her son's Howard University acceptance letter, athletic scholarship details, and 15-character witness statements, including one from the mayor himself. Next to her, Coach James Richardson shifted uncomfortably, his usually booming voice reduced to worried whispers about the security footage that should have cleared his star point guard's name. Judge Porter studied the courtroom from his elevated bench, his silver hair and steel-rimmed glasses crafted to project authority. His eyes barely skimmed the evidence folder detailing how the convenience store robbery suspect stood 6'4", a full 4 inches taller than Marcus. Instead, his attention lingered on the texts from his country club friends about their upcoming golf game, where they'd undoubtedly praise him for being tough on crime. "Your Honor," Marcus's public defender started, her voice steady despite the dark circles under her eyes. "The security footage clearly shows." "I've reviewed the evidence, Counselor." Porter cut her off, his tone carrying the weight of 20 years on the bench and generations of family wealth. He ignored the way his own daughter, Emily, flinched in her seat at the back of the courtroom, where she sat taking notes for her high school civics class. Marcus stood as instructed, his school blazer hanging slightly loose on his frame. He'd lost weight during the 3 months in juvenile detention awaiting trial. The Gold Honor Society pin on his lapel caught the light, a cruel reminder of the future slipping through his fingers. "Marcus Thompson," Porter's voice resonated through the courtroom, "this court takes very seriously the matter of armed robbery. Despite your age, the nature of this crime demands appropriate consequences." He paused, savoring the moment of power like a fine wine. "The evidence, while circumstantial, paints a clear picture." In the gallery, Dr. Thompson's breath hitched. The evidence consisted of a grainy photo of someone in a Howard University sweatshirt, the same kind sold at every tourist shop in D.C., and a witness description that matched half the black teenage boys in the district. The security footage showing the true height of the perpetrator had been deemed inconclusive during discovery. Given the violent nature of the crime, Porter continued, ignoring Marcus's unblemished record and the stack of college acceptance letters, this court sentences you to 10 years in the state penitentiary. The gavel's crack split the air like a gunshot. Dr. Thompson's sob pierced the courtroom's stunned silence, while Coach Richardson's chair scraped against the floor as he stood in protest, only to be silenced by the bailiff's warning glare. Emily Porter's pen clattered to the floor, her teenage hands trembling as she watched tears stream down Marcus's face. Her father's satisfied smile, the same one he wore at home after a successful day at court, suddenly seemed foreign, almost predatory. As Marcus was led away in handcuffs, his mother's cries echoing off the courtroom's expensive wooden panels, Judge Porter was already thinking about his next case. He didn't notice Emily's gaze following Marcus, nor the way she clutched her notebook to her chest like a shield. He couldn't know that this moment, this casual destruction of a young man's future, would return to haunt him through the eyes of his own daughter, exactly 5 years from today. The harsh fluorescent lights of the State Penitentiary Processing Center cast unflattering shadows across Marcus Thompson's face as he exchanged his carefully chosen court attire for an orange jumpsuit. Each item surrendered felt like giving away pieces of his identity. The Honor Society pin his mother had proudly fastened to his lapel, the basketball team captain's ring, even his Howard University acceptance letter, folded and refolded until the creases threatened to tear. "Keep moving," the intake officer barked, seemingly immune to the sight of another young black man entering the system. Marcus's prison ID photo captured none of the warmth that had made him a natural leader at Washington Heights High. Instead, it showed hollow eyes and tight lips, a mask he'd need to wear for survival. Across town, in the Porter family's sprawling Victorian home, Emily sat at their formal dining table, pushing her mother's roasted vegetables around her bone china plate. The television in the adjacent room droned with evening news, her father's latest tough on crime sentencing making headlines. Another victory for justice today, Judge Porter announced, raising his wine glass. When these thugs realize there are consequences. He wasn't a thug. Emily's voice was quiet but clear, surprising even herself. Marcus Thompson was in National Honor Society. Like me. The dining room fell silent. Martha Porter's fork clattered against her plate, her practiced smile faltering. The judge's face darkened like storm clouds gathering. "Emily," he warned, "you don't understand the complexities of our justice system. That boy tutored kids at the community center." Emily cut in, her hands trembling beneath the table. "I looked him up. He had a full scholarship to Howard. He was." "Enough." Porter's fist hit the table, making the crystal water glasses dance. "You will not question my decisions in this house. I've been on the bench longer than you've been alive." Meanwhile, at Riverside State Penitentiary, Marcus lay on his thin mattress, trying to block out the cacophony of prison life. Metal doors clanging, inmates shouting, guards' boots echoing on concrete floors. His cellmate, a wizened man named Jerome, watched him with knowing eyes. "First night's the hardest, young blood," Jerome offered, his voice gravelly from years of prison air. "But you got something most don't. Education. Don't let this place take that from you." Back at the Porter residence, Emily retreated to her bedroom, a space that suddenly felt suffocating despite its designer wallpaper and bay windows. She pulled out her phone, searching for more information about Marcus Thompson. Each detail she uncovered felt like a knife twist. Basketball team captain, volunteer math tutor, part-time job to help his single mother. The security camera footage showing the real perpetrator's height difference haunted her thoughts. In the prison library the next day, Marcus discovered a forgotten corner with law books. As he ran his fingers along their spines, he remembered his mother's words. "Education is the one thing they can never take from you." He pulled out a basic law text, ignoring the guard's smirk. If he had to serve time, he'd make it count. Dr. Patricia Thompson stood in her son's empty bedroom, still perfectly made from the morning of the trial. Basketball trophies lined the shelves, now gathering dust. His acceptance letter to Howard lay on the desk where she'd placed it after the verdict, like a dream preserved in amber. She picked up his team photo, Marcus in the center, captain's badge gleaming, and pressed it to her chest. At her private school the next day, Emily sat through AP government class, unable to focus as her teacher discussed the importance of an impartial judiciary. During lunch, she overheard her usual group of friends praising her father's tough stance on crime. The cafeteria's chicken sandwich turned to ash in her mouth. That evening, as Judge Porter received congratulatory calls from his colleagues, two worlds continued spinning in opposite directions. Emily starting to question everything she'd been raised to believe, and Marcus beginning to understand that survival would require more than just physical strength. It would demand the kind of inner resilience that no prison bars could contain. 5 years carved deep valleys into lives on both sides of the prison walls. Marcus Thompson, now 22, sat cross-legged on his bunk, legal textbooks spread before him like a paper fortress. His orange jumpsuit had faded to a dull rust, but his mind had sharpened into a legal razor. The prison library had become his sanctuary, each borrowed book another brick in the wall of knowledge he was building. "Yo, Thompson," called Miguel, a 19-year-old recent arrival. "They're about to transfer Johnson to Max. He ain't done nothing wrong, man." Marcus's reputation as the cell block's unofficial legal advisor had grown steadily. Inmates sought him out for everything from understanding their appeal rights to writing letters to their children. He looked up from his study materials, dark circles under his eyes testament to late nights poring over case law. "Bring me his paperwork," Marcus said, already clearing space on his bed. He'd learned that helping others made his own sentence feel less like mere punishment and more like preparation for something greater. Meanwhile, in Georgetown University's law library, Emily Porter's fingers flew across her laptop keyboard, her coffee long cold beside her. Now 20, her father's golden girl image had tarnished into something more complex. Her research fellowship focused on racial disparities in sentencing, a choice that had raised her father's eyebrows at their increasingly rare family dinners. "There's a pattern here," she muttered, pulling up case after case. Her spreadsheet showed a disturbing trend. Defendants of color in her father's courtroom received sentences averaging 40% longer than their white counterparts for identical crimes. Her stomach churned as the numbers painted an undeniable picture. Across town, Dr. Patricia Thompson stepped out of surgery, her scrubs bearing the evidence of a 12-hour shift. She'd taken on extra work to fund Marcus's appeals, each paycheck divided between living expenses and lawyer fees. During breaks, she participated in Innocence Project meetings via video call, her son's case becoming a rallying point for judicial reform activists. Dr. Thompson, her colleague, approached carefully. "There's someone here from the Justice Reform Coalition. They're interested in Marcus's case." Back at Riverside State, Marcus intervened as two inmates squared off in the exercise yard. His voice, calm but commanding, cut through the tension. "Williams, remember what we talked about in anger management group. You've got 3 months left. Don't throw it away." The gathered crowd dispersed, guards nodding appreciatively. Marcus had started a peer counseling program that had reduced violent incidents by 30%, earning him respect from both inmates and administration. But at night, alone in his cell, he still dreamed of basketball courts and graduation gowns. In her Georgetown apartment, Emily's eyes widened as she discovered a familiar case number. Her heart raced as Marcus Thompson's file filled her screen, the first case that had made her question her father's infallibility. She pulled up the security camera footage she'd finally gained access to through her fellowship. "Oh God," she whispered, measuring the height markers clearly visible in the frame. The robber towered over the store's entrance mark of 6 feet. Marcus Thompson's booking height, 5'10". Her father had seen this evidence, had deliberately ignored it. Dr. Thompson sat in her living room, surrounded by case files and appeal documents. Marcus's high school basketball jersey hung framed on the wall, beside his honor roll certificates. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Innocence Project. "New evidence found. Meeting tomorrow." In the prison library, Marcus helped a younger inmate with his GED prep. "Education is freedom," he said, echoing his mother's words. "They can lock up your body, but your mind, that's yours." Emily stayed late at the law library, gathering evidence of her father's pattern of bias. Her hands trembled as she printed document after document. A security guard passed by, checking the time. "Library's closing, Miss Porter." "Just 5 more minutes," she pleaded, watching another case file load. Her father's signature stood bold at the bottom of a questionable conviction, then another and another. Like dominoes waiting to fall, each case connected to form a picture of systematic injustice. She didn't notice the tears rolling down her cheeks until one splashed onto her keyboard. Outside her window, the Georgetown campus glowed under evening lights, while miles away, Marcus Thompson prepared for another night behind bars, neither knowing their paths were about to violently intersect. The Justice Reform Conference buzzed with energy in the grand ballroom of the Washington Plaza Hotel. Attorneys, activists, and academics mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, their conversations a steady hum of legal jargon and calls for change. Emily Porter stood near the back, her Georgetown law lanyard feeling like a shield against the crowd's scrutiny. Nobody here knew she was Judge Porter's daughter. She'd deliberately registered using her mother's maiden name, Bennett. Dr. Patricia Thompson approached the podium, her medical coat replaced by a tailored Navy suit. 5 years of fighting the system had added silver streaks to her hair, but strengthened her spine. The room hushed as she adjusted the microphone. "My son's name is Marcus Thompson," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of those words. 5 years ago, he was a high school senior with a full scholarship to Howard University. Today, he's inmate number 247,891. Emily's notebook slipped from her suddenly numb fingers. She knew that number, had seen it countless times in her research. Her throat closed as she watched Dr. Thompson command the room with quiet dignity. The security footage showing the real perpetrator was ignored. Dr. Thompson continued, displaying side-by-side images on the screen behind her. My son's height, his alibis, his character, all dismissed by a judge more interested in maintaining his reputation than serving justice. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Emily pressed herself against the back wall, her heart thundering. She'd seen those same images in her research files just days ago. During the coffee break, Emily found herself behind Dr. Thompson in the refreshment line. The older woman's hands shook slightly as she reached for a cup, betraying the toll of her presentation. Let me help you with that, Emily offered, steadying the coffee pot. Thank you, dear. Dr. Thompson's smile carried the same warmth Emily had seen in Marcus's high school photos. Are you a law student? Yes, at Georgetown. Your speech was... Emily swallowed hard. Your son's case seems like a clear miscarriage of justice. They found a quiet table in the corner. Dr. Thompson pulled out her phone, showing Emily pictures of Marcus, before and after. The latest showed him in the prison library, surrounded by legal books. He's teaching other inmates now, Dr. Thompson said proudly. Started a GED program, mentors the younger ones. Even the guards come to him for advice on their family legal troubles. She laughed softly, but her eyes glistened. Meanwhile, at Riverside State, Marcus sat in a counseling session with Jason, a young inmate facing his first parole hearing. Remember, Marcus advised, his voice carrying the authority of hard-won wisdom. Focus on your actions, not excuses. Show them who you've become, not who you were. The guard watching them nodded approvingly. Over the years, Marcus had transformed from just another number to an essential part of the prison's rehabilitation programs. His cell now doubled as an unofficial legal aid office, walls lined with carefully maintained law books. Back at the conference, Emily listened intently as Dr. Thompson detailed her son's achievements before incarceration. He worked part-time at the community center. Dr. Thompson continued, teaching basketball to elementary school kids. The day of the robbery, he was actually there, running a tournament. We had dozens of witnesses, security footage from the center's cameras. Emily's coffee turned cold as the familiar details of the case she'd been researching came alive through a mother's voice. Each word hammered home the reality of what her father had done. The judge, Dr. Thompson's voice caught slightly. He wouldn't even look at the evidence. Just kept talking about sending a message and maintaining order. She shook her head. My son's life was worth more than some judge's political statement. Emily's hands began to shake. She knew those phrases, had heard them at countless dinner tables, cocktail parties, family gatherings. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Sometimes examples must be made. As Dr. Thompson excused herself for her next panel, Emily remained frozen at the table, her world tilting on its axis. In her briefcase, the evidence of her father's systematic bias felt like it was burning through the leather. The conference program in front of her blurred as tears threatened. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father. Dinner tonight. Proud of my daughter, the future legal eagle. Emily stared at the message, then back at Dr. Thompson's retreating figure. The collision of these two worlds was no longer theoretical. It was time to choose a side. The Georgetown Law Library's basement archive smelled of dust and secrets. At 2 a.m., Emily sat surrounded by towers of case files, her laptop's blue light casting ghostly shadows on the metal shelves. Her father's cases spread before her like a prosecutor's nightmare. Each folder a life altered, each signature a testament to prejudice wrapped in judicial robes. Dear God, she whispered, pulling up the security footage from Marcus's case she'd finally obtained through her fellowship's special access. The timestamp matched the robbery perfectly. 3:47 p.m., March 15th, 5 years ago. But instead of showing Marcus Thompson, the crystal-clear footage revealed a much taller man, face obscured but height unmistakable against the doorframe's measuring tape. Her hands trembled as she opened another file on her laptop, her father's private court notes, accessed through a database supposedly sealed from public view. There it was, in his meticulous handwriting. Security footage shows height discrepancy. Note: suppress under Evidence Rule 403, potentially misleading to jury. The bathroom barely caught her as she retched, her dinner coming up in violent heaves. The pristine marble floor of the law library restroom pressed cold against her knees, grounding her in a reality she wished she could deny. Across town, Judge William Porter accepted the Excellence in Judicial Service Award at the State Bar Association's annual gala. His acceptance speech dripped with practiced humility. Justice must be blind, he intoned to appreciative nods, but she must also be firm. Our community's safety depends on consistent, unwavering application of the law. Emily's phone buzzed with a news alert about her father's award. The same notification showed a smaller headline: Riverside State Prison reduces violence by 30% through inmate-led programs. The accompanying photo showed Marcus Thompson teaching in the prison library, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the law books surrounding him. She pulled up her spreadsheet again, the data damning in its clarity. In cases involving minority defendants, her father had suppressed exculpatory evidence 11 times in the past decade. Marcus Thompson wasn't an anomaly. He was part of a pattern. Her fellowship supervisor's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the most important cases aren't in the headlines. They're buried in the footnotes, hidden in the margins. Back at the gala, Porter raised his crystal champagne flute, photographer's flashes catching the expensive watch on his wrist, a gift from the Conservative Justice Coalition for his tough stance on crime. Emily's phone lit up again. A message from Dr. Thompson. New evidence hearing scheduled for next month. Still hoping for a miracle. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Emily meticulously documented everything. Her father's private court notes revealed a calculated pattern: evidence marked for suppression, witness statements deemed unreliable without cause, bail set impossibly high for minority defendants, while their white counterparts walked free on personal recognizance. She found Marcus's case buried in the middle of a 5-year streak of similar convictions. The security footage wasn't the only evidence her father had buried. Character witness statements from the mayor, the community center director, and Marcus's teachers, all marked excluded as cumulative. Her hand shook as she dialed a number she'd gotten at the Justice Reform Conference. Innocence Project. My name is Emily. Emily Bennett. I have evidence of systematic judicial misconduct. Multiple cases, including Marcus Thompson's. The voice on the other end grew excited. Thompson. We've been working on that case for years. What kind of evidence? Everything, Emily whispered, looking at her father's signature on yet another suppression order. Security footage, court notes, proof of pattern and practice. I'm Judge Porter's daughter. The line went silent for a moment. Then, are you sure you want to do this? This could end your father's career. Your family. Emily looked at the photo of Marcus in the prison library again, teaching other inmates despite everything her father had stolen from him. She thought of Dr. Thompson's dignity in her fight for justice, of the other families torn apart by her father's carefully constructed web of prejudice. My father's going to receive an award tomorrow night, she said, her voice strengthening. I think it's time he received something else instead. The truth. The clock ticked toward dawn as Emily began downloading files, each one another nail in the coffin of her father's reputation. Sometimes, she realized, justice wore the face of a daughter's betrayal. The State Bar Association's grand ballroom sparkled with self-congratulation. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over silk tablecloths and silver place settings, while judges and attorneys in expensive suits traded stories of their supposed triumphs over injustice. At the head table, Judge William Porter adjusted his bow tie, rehearsing his acceptance speech for the Lifetime Achievement in Judicial Excellence Award. The double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. Emily Porter strode in, still wearing her Georgetown Law sweatshirt, laptop clutched to her chest like a shield. Behind her, a small army of people filed in silently. Dr. Patricia Thompson, representatives from the Innocence Project, and families from other cases Emily had uncovered. Ladies and gentlemen, Emily's voice carried across the suddenly silent room, her hand steady as she connected her laptop to the podium's projection system. Before we celebrate my father's commitment to justice, I believe there's evidence the court needs to review. Judge Porter half rose from his seat, face darkening. Emily, what do you think you're? The security footage from Marcus Thompson's case filled the massive screen behind the podium. The timestamp clear, the height markers unmistakable. 5 years ago, Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. A 17-year-old honor student named Marcus Thompson was sentenced to 10 years in prison for a crime he physically could not have committed. The perpetrator in this footage is 6'4". Marcus Thompson is 5'10". The ballroom erupted in whispers. Dr. Thompson stepped forward, her dignity a rebuke to the opulent surroundings. My son lost his scholarship, his future, and 5 years of his life, she stated, her voice cutting through the murmurs. While you've been dining on filet mignon, he's been eating prison food and helping other innocent men understand their rights. This is completely inappropriate, Judge Porter thundered, but his words died as Emily clicked to the next slide, his own handwritten notes ordering the footage suppressed. It wasn't just Marcus, Emily's voice cracked slightly. I've documented 37 cases where evidence was systematically suppressed, all involving minority defendants. She turned to face her father directly. Did you think no one would ever check? That your reputation would protect you forever? The crowd's whispers turned to gasps as Emily methodically displayed case after case, each one damning. Altered transcripts, buried evidence, inflated sentences. In the back of the room, journalists who'd come to cover the award ceremony were frantically taking notes. Emily, her father's voice had lost its judicial authority, revealing something smaller, desperate. You don't understand the complexities. I understand perfectly, Emily cut him off. I understand that Marcus Thompson has spent 5 years teaching other inmates to read while you've been accepting awards. I understand that Dr. Thompson has worked double shifts to pay for appeals while you've played golf with the people who fund your campaigns. From the crowd, another voice spoke up. My son got 15 years for a crime he didn't commit. Then another, my brother's still serving time because evidence was lost. And another, Judge Porter said character witnesses weren't relevant in my daughter's case. The dam had broken. Years of carefully hidden injustice poured out as families stood up one by one, their stories echoing off the ballroom's ornate walls. Judge Porter's face had gone ashen. He looked around the room, seeking support from his colleagues, but found only turned backs and averted eyes. The mighty had begun to abandon one of their own. I move for an immediate review of all cases presided over by Judge William Porter, announced a senior member of the Bar Association, his voice heavy with authority, and his immediate suspension pending investigation. Emily's hands finally began to shake as she watched her father's carefully constructed world crumble. He seemed to have aged decades in minutes, his shoulders slumping under the weight of exposed truth. Why? He asked her, his voice barely a whisper. I'm your father. Emily looked at Dr. Thompson, who stood tall despite tears streaming down her face, then back at her father. Because Marcus Thompson is somebody's son too, she answered. And justice isn't supposed to care whose. As security escorted Judge Porter from the ballroom, Emily felt a hand on her shoulder. Dr. Thompson stood beside her, their tears mingling with shared purpose. Thank you, Dr. Thompson whispered. But this is just the beginning. Emily nodded, knowing that exposing injustice was only the first step. The harder work of making it right still lay ahead. 3 weeks after the ballroom confrontation, Emily sat in a sterile prison conference room, her father across the table looking smaller without his judicial robes. His silver hair had turned almost white, and his hands trembled slightly as he signed the affidavit admitting to years of judicial misconduct. "I never thought about them as people," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just cases. Numbers. Statistics that proved I was tough on crime." He looked up at his daughter, age lines deepening around his eyes. "When did you become so much better than me?" "Not better," Emily replied, gathering the papers. "Just awake. Marcus Thompson woke me up 5 years ago. I've been watching you sleep ever since." Down the hallway, in the prison library, Marcus Thompson was holding his final GED preparation class. News of Judge Porter's confession had spread through the prison like wildfire, and his students watched him with a mix of awe and hope. "Mr. Thompson," asked Jerome, his youngest student, "does this mean you're getting out?" Marcus closed the textbook carefully. "It means the truth finally got in. And truth has a way of setting everyone free, even those who tried to bury it." Dr. Patricia Thompson stood before the state Supreme Court Disciplinary Board, her voice steady as she addressed the panel. "We're not asking for vengeance. We're asking for restoration. Judge Porter's confession opens the door to review hundreds of cases. Behind each one is a family like mine, waiting for justice to remember their names." The Chief Justice leaned forward. "Dr. Thompson, given Judge Porter's admission of systematic bias, what remedy would you suggest?" "A complete review of every case he presided over involving minority defendants," she answered, "conducted by an independent panel that includes community members, civil rights attorneys, and—" She paused, looking at Emily in the gallery, "those who understand both sides of the bench." Emily's phone buzzed with messages from law firms offering partnerships, book deals, and television appearances. She declined them all, instead accepting a position with the newly formed Judicial Review Task Force. Her father's cases would be her first assignment. Back in his cell, Marcus received news that his case would be the first reviewed. He celebrated by helping another inmate write an appeal letter. "You knew you were innocent all this time," the inmate observed. "How did you keep going?" Marcus thought about the question as he corrected the letter's legal citations. "My mother taught me that education lights up the darkness. So I turned my cell into a classroom, and the darkness started running from us instead." In his home study, Judge William Porter sorted through years of case files. Each manila folder represented a life he'd altered, a future he'd redirected. Emily found him there at midnight, surrounded by paper and regret. "I need your help," he said without looking up. "There are patterns here I didn't see before, or didn't want to see. You have better eyes than mine now." Emily sat down beside the man who had taught her about justice, only to learn it from his mistakes. "Where do you want to start?" "With Marcus," he answered. "We owe him that much." The next morning, Dr. Thompson received a call from the Innocence Project. Judge Porter had provided a detailed account of every case where he'd allowed bias to influence his decisions. The evidence was damning, but his cooperation would help free dozens of wrongfully convicted individuals. In the prison library, Marcus added another law book to his collection, a gift from a retiring guard who'd seen him transform the place into a beacon of hope. On its cover, the guard had written, "Justice bends toward truth when truth has warriors like you." Emily worked late into the night at the task force office, her father's cases spread across 3 whiteboards. Dr. Thompson brought her dinner, and they shared stories about Marcus, the person he was, the man he'd become, the symbol he never asked to be. "Your father called me today," Dr. Thompson said softly. "He asked if I could ever forgive him." Emily looked up from her notes. "What did you tell him?" "I said forgiveness, like justice, is earned one case at a time." Dr. Thompson smiled. "He's reviewing Marcus's appeal personally now." Says he wants to look at everything he refused to see before. Outside the window, the sun set on a system starting to bend toward justice as bridges began to rise from the ashes of fallen walls. The morning of Marcus Thompson's release dawned with a gentle spring rain, nature's way of washing the slate clean. At exactly 9:00 a.m., the heavy gates of Riverside State Prison opened, and Marcus stepped out wearing a charcoal suit Dr. Thompson had carefully chosen, the same color as the one he should have worn to his Howard University graduation. Camera flashes erupted as he embraced his mother, their tears mingling with the rain. Behind them stood Emily Porter, clutching a leather portfolio containing Marcus's full exoneration papers, including her father's detailed confession and the court's formal apology. 5 years, 3 months, and 12 days, Marcus whispered into his mother's hair. But who's counting? Dr. Thompson laughed through her tears, touching her son's face as if ensuring he was real. Every single second, she answered. The press conference that followed wasn't held in a sterile courthouse or government building, but at the community center where Marcus had been teaching basketball the day of the robbery. The same security cameras that had recorded his alibi now captured a different kind of history. Today isn't just about my freedom. Marcus addressed the packed room, his voice carrying the weight and wisdom of his journey. It's about transformation. While I was teaching GED classes behind bars, I learned something crucial. Justice isn't just a concept in law books. It's a living thing that grows when we nurture it and dies when we ignore it. In the back of the room, William Porter sat in civilian clothes, his former judicial authority stripped away. He listened as Marcus detailed the educational program he created in prison, which had helped 28 inmates earn their GEDs and 3 start college courses. "Mr. Thompson," a reporter called out, "do you harbor resentment toward Judge Porter?" The room held its breath. Marcus looked directly at his former judge. "Resentment is a cell we build ourselves. I've had enough of cells. Instead, I'm announcing the creation of Second Chance Legal Clinic, a nonprofit organization that will provide legal education and representation to the wrongfully convicted." Emily stepped forward, opening her portfolio. "And I'm proud to announce that the Porter Family Foundation, created from the sale of my father's assets, will fully fund the clinic's first 5 years." The cameras swung to capture William Porter's reaction. He stood slowly, aged but unbowed. "My daughter taught me that true justice begins with acknowledging our wrongs. Today I'm committing the remainder of my life to working under Mr. Thompson's direction, reviewing cases of potential wrongful conviction." Dr. Thompson reached for her son's hand as he unveiled the clinic's mission statement. Education liberates. Truth heals. Justice prevails. Later that evening, in the quiet of the community center's basketball court, Marcus dribbled a ball for the first time in 5 years. The familiar rhythm came back instantly, muscle memory unchanged by time or trials. Emily watched from the bleachers, remembering the high school gang photos she'd studied during her investigation. "You know," Marcus said, sinking a perfect three-pointer, "I used to dream about this court every night in my cell." "And now?" Emily asked. "Now I dream about the people still inside, the ones who haven't found their voice yet." He passed her the ball. "Your father's going to help us find them." As if summoned, William Porter appeared in the gymnasium doorway, carrying boxes of legal files. "These are just the first batch," he said, his voice humble. "There are hundreds more to review." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of the work ahead. "Then we better get started. Dr. Thompson is converting her clinic's basement into our office space. Speaking of which," Emily added, "she's waiting for us. She's ordered celebration dinner for everyone, including the families of other wrongfully convicted individuals we've identified." The 3 of them walked out together, the exonerated man, the daughter who chose truth over family loyalty, and the former judge learning to serve justice rather than just sentence it. Above them, the community center's security cameras recorded their exit, the same cameras that had once proved Marcus's innocence now witnessing his triumph. In the parking lot, Dr. Thompson waited by her car, holding a framed photo of Marcus's high school graduation. Next to it was a new frame, waiting to be filled with images of future victories, future liberations, future healing. "Ready to change the world?" she asked as they approached. Marcus looked at his unlikely team, his mother who never lost faith, Emily who risked everything for truth, and Judge Porter who learned justice is never too late to find. "The world," Marcus smiled, "has already changed. Now we just have to help it keep its promises." And together, they stepped into a future where justice wasn't just blind, but had finally learned to see.